In 1912, a 4-year-old child vanished in Louisiana. What followed was a missing child case that would ultimately be upended by a 2004 DNA test. It was a scientific intervention that revealed a 91-year-old error, but left the original mystery completely unsolved. In this explainer, we're going to examine the documentary record of the Bobby Dunbar case. We'll look at what the historical evidence actually says, and more importantly, what the DNA test actually did. Section 1, 2 headlines, 1 afternoon. To understand how things went so wrong, we have to look at the exact same day in 1913, when 2 Louisiana newspapers described the precise same moment between a mother and a found boy. There's a stark contradiction in the historical record here. One account claimed the boy yelled, "Mother," and she collapsed. The other reported that she stepped back, gasped, and explicitly said she wasn't quite sure. Both headlines describe the exact same uncertain afternoon. One of these accounts was printed and believed. The legal decision that followed took a child from one woman, gave him to another, and destroyed 2 people who were probably telling the truth. It was a ruling that held for nearly a century. Section 2, the lake. Robert Clarence Dunbar, known to his family as Bobby, was 4 years old when he vanished on August 23, 1912. He was on a family fishing trip at Swayze Lake in St. Landry Parish. Sometime that afternoon, he was simply no longer there. The search efforts were desperate, exhaustive, and completely fruitless. Hundreds of volunteers combed the area for a week. They dynamited the water. Alligators were shot and cut open. The family hired the William Burns Detective Agency and even brought in a psychic. But absolutely no remains or forensic evidence of Bobby were ever recovered. The search yielded only a dead deer, a cap, 1 shoe, and some small footprints near a railroad track. Over 8 months, the reward climbed from $1,000 to $6,000. That was an extraordinary sum of money at the time, and it reflects just how badly the Dunbar family wanted an answer. Yet nothing was found. Section 3, 2 mothers, 1 method. 8 months after the disappearance, an itinerant handyman named William Cantwell Walters was arrested while traveling with a small boy. Walters claimed the boy was Bruce Anderson, the son of a field hand named Julia Anderson, who he said had permitted him to take the boy along. The record carefully details Lessie Dunbar's process of identifying the boy. On the first day, there was initial uncertainty regarding the boy's eyes, which both parents stated looked too small. On the second day, she bathed the child and examined his moles and scars. After this physical examination, she declared certainty. This was widely reported as a mother's recognition. Julia Anderson went through an identical process. She traveled from North Carolina and showed initial uncertainty when asked to identify her son among a lineup of 5 boys. The boy was crying and refused an orange from her. So she requested a second viewing, where she undressed and examined the boy. Following this physical examination, she declared her own certainty that the boy was Bruce. If you place these 2 sequences side by side, the identification methods were identical. First, initial uncertainty. Then, physical examination. Finally, a declaration of certainty. But due entirely to differences in money, marriage, and social standing, the press reported one as a maternal recognition and the other as a fraud being caught out. Section 4, in place of evidence. Without any forensic evidence to rely on, the question of custody was deeply influenced by John M. Parker Sr. He was a prominent politician and a future governor of Louisiana, who examined the boy and simply announced he had no doubt. This political endorsement stood in place of forensic evidence, and custody was ultimately settled by a court-appointed arbitrator. Julia Anderson had no money and no lawyer. She went home without her son and was thoroughly destroyed by the press. To understand just how brutal the public character attacks on her were, we only need to look at a period article written by Jerome G. Beatty in the New Orleans Item under the headline, "Julia Has Forgotten." The newspaper stated that children were only regrettable incidents in her life, and of true mother love, she had none. She was viciously attacked for having children outside of marriage. In stark contrast, a single anonymous letter preserved in the Walters defense file, signed only "A Christian Woman," defended her. The letter pointed out that if the Dunbars didn't immediately recognize their own child, who had only been gone 8 months, they didn't know him at all. We also must trace William Walters' legal journey. In April 1914, he was arrested and tried for kidnapping, which was a capital offense. Julia Anderson, along with at least 20 residents of Mississippi, testified for his defense. In May 1914, he was convicted and sentenced to life.
While his conviction was later overturned by the Louisiana Supreme Court and he was released after 2 years, he was never retried due solely to the cost of the first trial. Historically, it's crucial to note that he was never cleared, acquitted, or exonerated.
From jail, Walters wrote a desperate letter to Percy Dunbar. He wrote, "So you have a lost Robert and me a lost Bruce. May God bless my darling boy." After the trial, the world moved on. Julia Anderson later married, settled in Mississippi, and had 7 more children. The boy at the center of the dispute grew up, lived, and died in a Houston hospital in 1966 as Bobby Dunbar. Section 5. The DNA exclusion. Move forward 33 years after the boy's death. A granddaughter named Margaret Dunbar Cutright received a scrapbook of clippings from her father. This led her to track down the complete, unpublished Walters defense file, which contained 400 pages of letters, affidavits, and evidence the newspapers had never printed. In 2004, Bob Dunbar Jr., the son of the man who had been raised as Bobby, provided a DNA sample to test the 1913 court decision. This sample was to be compared against David Dunbar, a true first cousin through Bobby's undisputed younger brother, Alonzo. We have to be incredibly precise about what this test actually did. It was a Y chromosome comparison. The results proved that the men did not match. This firmly established that the man raised as Bobby Dunbar was not Percy Dunbar's biological son. It strictly proved who the man was not. It never proved that he was Bruce Anderson. A test of the Dunbar male line cannot speak to a maternal line at all. The boy's true identity remains a documentary case, not a DNA case. The evidence strongly indicates he was Bruce Anderson, but it doesn't prove it. A non-paternity event anywhere in the Dunbar male line would produce the exact same DNA exclusion. Margaret's publication of her documentary findings caused a single point of disagreement within her family, with some relatives accusing her of disrespecting their heritage, but she published anyway. Section 6. Still missing. Margaret Dunbar Cutright has stated she believes the boy most likely fell into the lake. However, this explainer will not reconstruct the disappearance because absolutely no forensic evidence supports a reconstruction. No remains of the real Bobby Dunbar have ever been found, and the case remains completely unsolved. When the DNA result came back, Hollis Rawls, Julia Anderson's son, had to be told. A boy in his family had gone missing in 1913, and the courts had told his mother she was mistaken about her own child. 91 years later, upon hearing the news, he went around the couch and hugged Bob Dunbar Jr.'s neck. His reaction was simple, stating, "Just knowing that man, we were family. We were just family." The conclusion of the historical record is stark. A 1913 court definitively answered a question it had no means of answering. It took a cheek swab to establish that the answer was wrong. The real 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar, who walked away from Swayze Lake, has never been found. He is still missing. Section 7. Outro. If the boy raised as Bobby Dunbar wasn't him, and Bruce Anderson's identity remains unproven, who really walked away from Swayze Lake that day? And what does it take for history to finally admit it was wrong? This is Neural Edge Publishing. The sourced record behind this explainer and the cases being worked on next can be found at CassianCreed.com.